Think about the most powerful office in America, the presidency. For over 2 centuries, we've put our trust in leaders who promise to protect our democracy and serve the people. But what happens when those same leaders become the very threats they swore to defend against? What if I told you that some of our most celebrated presidents orchestrated cover-ups, illegal surveillance programs, and scandals so shocking they would make your head spin? Today, we're diving deep into the presidential scandals that were buried, hidden, and swept under the rug. These aren't just political missteps or campaign finance violations. We're talking about full-blown conspiracies, abuse of power, and secrets so damaging they could have toppled administrations. Some of these stories have never been fully told, and others were successfully covered up for decades. But before we expose these presidential secrets, let me ask you something. How well do you really know the leaders you've trusted with your freedom? Because by the end of this video, you might never look at the Oval Office the same way again. And trust me, some of these revelations will shock you to your core. Let's start with one of the most beloved presidents in American history, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the man who led us through the Great Depression and World War II. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. FDR orchestrated one of the most extensive domestic surveillance operations in American history, targeting American citizens without warrants or legal justification. During World War II, Roosevelt authorized the FBI to wiretap, infiltrate, and spy on thousands of Americans, including journalists, civil rights leaders, and political opponents. The justification: national security. Sound familiar? But it gets worse. Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor before it happened. Declassified documents reveal that the administration had intercepted Japanese communications indicating an imminent attack on American soil. Yet they allowed it to happen, sacrificing over 2,000 American lives to justify entering World War II. The president and his inner circle made a calculated decision to let American servicemen die to advance their political agenda. This wasn't incompetence. This was a deliberate cover-up that lasted for decades. And while we're talking about war crimes, let's discuss Roosevelt's decision to intern over 100,000 Japanese Americans in concentration camps. These weren't enemy combatants. These were American citizens, including children, who were stripped of their rights and imprisoned based solely on their ethnicity. The administration knew this was unconstitutional, but they did it anyway. And when the war ended, they buried the evidence and classified the documents for 50 years. But Roosevelt wasn't the only president who sacrificed American lives for political gain. Let's talk about Lyndon B. Johnson and the Gulf of Tonkin incident. In 1964, Johnson told the American people that North Vietnamese forces had attacked U.S. naval vessels in international waters. This supposed attack was used to justify the Vietnam War, which would eventually claim over 58,000 American lives. But here's the truth. The attack never happened. It was a complete fabrication. Johnson and his defense secretary, Robert McNamara, knew that American ships had provoked the North Vietnamese by conducting covert operations in their territorial waters. When the Vietnamese responded defensively, the administration twisted the narrative to make it look like an unprovoked assault on innocent American forces. They lied to Congress, they lied to the American people, and they used this manufactured crisis to launch a war that devastated an entire generation. The Pentagon Papers, leaked years later, exposed the systematic deception, but by then it was too late. The damage was done. Johnson also used the FBI and CIA to spy on anti-war protesters, civil rights leaders, and political opponents. Martin Luther King Jr. was under constant surveillance, with the FBI attempting to blackmail him and destroy his reputation. The administration compiled secret dossiers on thousands of American citizens who dared to question the war or challenge the government's narrative. This wasn't law enforcement. This was political persecution. Speaking of political persecution, let's dive into Richard Nixon's crimes. Everyone knows about Watergate, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Nixon created an entire shadow government within the White House, complete with secret police, illegal surveillance operations, and a private army of operatives who broke into offices, stole documents, and intimidated political enemies. The plumbers, as they were called, weren't just burglarizing the Democratic National Committee. They were systematically undermining American democracy. Nixon ordered the IRS to audit his political enemies. He used federal agencies to harass journalists and activists. He maintained an enemies list that included celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens who criticized his administration. When Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers, exposing Johnson's lies about Vietnam, Nixon's operatives broke into his psychiatrist's office, looking for dirt to discredit him. This wasn't just corruption, this was fascism in action. But Nixon's most dangerous scandal wasn't Watergate. It was his secret bombing campaign in Cambodia. While publicly claiming to pursue peace in Vietnam, Nixon was secretly dropping more bombs on neutral Cambodia than the U.S. had dropped on Japan during World War II. He hid this from Congress, lied about it to the American people, and destabilized an entire region. The bombing campaign killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians and helped create the conditions that led to the Cambodian genocide. Nixon literally committed war crimes while serving as president. And when Congress started investigating his administration, Nixon ordered the firing of the special prosecutor in what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. He was prepared to destroy the entire Justice Department to protect himself from accountability. If not for the Supreme Court and a few principled Republicans, Nixon would have successfully turned America into a dictatorship. But Nixon wasn't the only president who abused surveillance powers. Let's talk about John F. Kennedy. The golden boy of American politics had a dark side that his family spent decades covering up. Kennedy authorized extensive wiretapping operations against civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI, with Kennedy's approval, placed listening devices in hotel rooms where King stayed, hoping to gather compromising information they could use to control or discredit him. Kennedy also approved Operation Mongoose, a secret CIA program designed to assassinate Fidel Castro. The operation included plans to poison Castro's cigars, contaminate his diving suit, and even use explosive seashells. When these ridiculous schemes failed, the CIA recruited members of organized crime to carry out the assassination. That's right. The President of the United States was in business with the mafia, using taxpayer money to fund murder plots against foreign leaders. But Kennedy's most dangerous scandal was his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis. While publicly projecting strength and resolve, Kennedy was secretly negotiating with the Soviets behind Congress's back. He agreed to remove American missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviets removing their missiles from Cuba. This wasn't diplomacy. This was appeasement. And Kennedy covered up the deal for decades, allowing himself to be portrayed as a hero who stood up to Soviet aggression when he had actually caved to their demands. Kennedy's administration also covered up his severe health problems. The president was addicted to painkillers and stimulants, often unable to function without a cocktail of drugs administered by a doctor who wasn't even licensed to practice medicine. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the fate of the world hung in the balance, Kennedy was high on methamphetamine and steroids. The American people deserved to know that their commander-in-chief was a drug addict making life and death decisions while under the influence. Now let's talk about a president who most people consider a saint, Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer from Georgia who promised to restore honesty to Washington. But Carter's administration was hiding some dark secrets. In 1979, Carter authorized a covert operation to arm and train Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan, including a young militant named Osama bin Laden. The goal was to draw the Soviet Union into a costly war in Afghanistan, but the operation created the conditions that would eventually lead to 9/11. Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, later admitted that they knew the operation would likely provoke a Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. They wanted to give the Soviets their own Vietnam, but they didn't care about the millions of innocent Afghans who would suffer in the process. Carter's administration funded and armed the same extremists who would later attack America, and they covered up their role in creating the problem for decades. Carter also used the CIA to interfere in elections around the world, supporting dictators and authoritarian regimes as long as they were friendly to American interests. In Iran, Carter's administration provided support to the Shah's brutal secret police, which tortured and murdered thousands of political dissidents. When the Iranian people finally overthrew the Shah, they had every reason to hate America. Carter's policies directly contributed to the Iranian hostage crisis and the decades of conflict that followed. But let's talk about a scandal that makes all of these look small. Ronald Reagan's Iran-Contra affair. In the 1980s, Congress explicitly prohibited military aid to the Contra rebels fighting the Nicaraguan government. So what did Reagan do? He authorized a secret operation to sell weapons to Iran and use the profits to fund the Contras. This wasn't just illegal, this was treason. Reagan's administration was literally in business with terrorists. Iran was holding American hostages, and Reagan was selling them weapons. When the operation was exposed, Reagan claimed he didn't know about it. But documents prove that he personally approved the weapon sales and was briefed on the operation's progress. Reagan lied to Congress, obstructed justice, and violated his oath of retort. Office to defend the Constitution. The Iran-Contra scandal involved drug trafficking, money laundering, and arms dealing on a massive scale. The CIA was smuggling cocaine into American cities to fund their covert operations. Inner-city communities were devastated by the crack epidemic, which was directly caused by Reagan's illegal wars. Thousands of Americans died from drug overdoses while Reagan's operatives counted their profits. When Congress investigated Iran-Contra, Reagan's administration shredded documents, intimidated witnesses, and stonewalled investigators. Oliver North, who ran the operation, was eventually convicted of multiple felonies, but Reagan pardoned him before he could serve his sentence. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Speaking of cover-ups, let's discuss George H.W. Bush's role in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Bush was working for the CIA in 1963, and documents suggest he was involved in the planning and execution of Kennedy's murder. The Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination, was packed with CIA assets and government insiders who had every reason to cover up the truth. Bush's oil company had connections to the anti-Castro Cubans, who were recruited for the Bay of Pigs invasion. These same operatives were later linked to Kennedy's assassination. Bush was in Dallas on November 22, 1963, despite claiming years later that he couldn't remember where he was when Kennedy was shot. FBI documents place Bush in contact with the CIA on the day of the assassination, receiving updates on the investigation. When Bush became president, he pardoned all of the Iran-Contra criminals and classified thousands of documents related to Kennedy's assassination. If Bush had nothing to hide, why would he work so hard to keep the evidence secret? The truth is that Kennedy was killed because he threatened the military-industrial complex that Bush represented. Kennedy wanted to end the Vietnam War, break up the CIA, and challenge the power of the deep state. So they eliminated him. But the Kennedy assassination was just one part of a larger pattern of political murders that plagued American politics. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, and countless others were killed because they challenged the system. And in every case, the government investigation was compromised, the evidence was destroyed, and the truth was buried. Let's talk about Bill Clinton's criminal empire. While governor of Arkansas, Clinton was involved in drug trafficking operations at Mena Airport. The CIA was using the airport to smuggle cocaine from South America while shipping weapons to Central American rebels. Clinton provided protection for these operations, and in return, he received political and financial support for his presidential campaign. The Clinton body count is real. Dozens of people who had knowledge of Clinton's crimes died under suspicious circumstances. Vince Foster, Clinton's deputy White House counsel, was murdered and his death staged to look like suicide. Ron Brown, Clinton's Commerce Secretary, was killed in a plane crash just days before he was scheduled to testify about Clinton's corruption. The pattern is undeniable. Clinton also used the IRS, FBI, and other federal agencies to target his political enemies. Conservative organizations were audited, harassed, and intimidated. Journalists who investigated Clinton's corruption found their tax returns under audit and their personal lives under scrutiny. This wasn't coincidence. This was systematic abuse of power. The Monica Lewinsky scandal was just a distraction from Clinton's real crimes. While everyone was focused on his sexual misconduct, Clinton was selling missile technology to China, accepting illegal campaign contributions from foreign governments, and using the Lincoln bedroom as a hotel for wealthy donors. The Chinese military's capabilities increased dramatically during Clinton's presidency because he literally sold them American military secrets. Clinton's foundation was a money laundering operation that accepted millions of dollars from foreign governments and defense contractors. When Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, the foundation's donations increased dramatically, creating obvious conflicts of interest. The Clintons weren't public servants. They were criminals who used their positions to enrich themselves and their allies. And speaking of the Clinton Foundation, let's discuss the Haiti scandal. After the devastating earthquake in 2010, the international community donated billions of dollars for Haiti's reconstruction. The Clinton Foundation was put in charge of distributing much of this aid. Instead of helping the Haitian people, the Clintons funneled the money to their friends and political allies. Luxury hotels were built for wealthy tourists, while ordinary Haitians remained homeless. This wasn't incompetence. This was theft on a massive scale. But the most shocking presidential scandal involves Barack Obama's surveillance state. Obama expanded domestic surveillance programs to an unprecedented level, collecting data on every American citizen without warrants or probable cause. The NSA was recording phone calls, reading emails, and tracking internet activity on a scale that would make Stalin jealous. When Edward Snowden exposed these programs, Obama's administration launched a global manhunt to silence him. Obama also weaponized the IRS against conservative organizations, using tax law to suppress political opposition. Tea Party groups were systematically targeted for audits and harassment. Conservative donors found their businesses under investigation. This wasn't law enforcement. This was political persecution designed to influence elections. Obama's Fast and Furious operation was even more criminal than Iran-Contra. The administration allowed thousands of weapons to flow to Mexican drug cartels, hoping to track them to cartel leaders. But they lost track of the weapons, which were used to kill hundreds of innocent people, including American law enforcement officers. When Congress investigated, Obama claimed executive privilege and refused to turn over documents. Attorney General Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress, but Obama protected him from prosecution. The Benghazi attack was another Obama cover-up. The administration knew that the attack was planned terrorism, not a spontaneous protest. But they lied to the American people, claiming it was caused by an anti-Islamic video. They even arrested the filmmaker and threw him in jail to maintain their false narrative. 4 Americans died, including Ambassador Chris Stevens, and Obama's administration covered up their failure to provide adequate security. Obama's drone program was a war crime factory. The administration killed thousands of innocent civilians in countries where America wasn't officially at war. They maintained kill lists that included American citizens who hadn't been charged with any crime. When they killed American citizen Anwar al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son, they provided no due process, no trial, no evidence of wrongdoing. They just murdered them because Obama decided they were threats. The most recent presidential scandal involves election interference and the deep state's attempt to overthrow a democratically elected president. When Donald Trump won the 2016 election, the intelligence community launched an unprecedented campaign to undermine his presidency. They used fabricated evidence, illegal surveillance, and media manipulation to create the impression that Trump was a Russian agent. The Steele dossier, which formed the basis for multiple FBI investigations, was complete fiction paid for by the Clinton campaign. The FBI knew it was fake, but they used it anyway to obtain surveillance warrants against Trump campaign officials. They spied on an opposition presidential campaign using fabricated evidence, then covered up their crimes when they were exposed. The Miller investigation was a 2-year witch hunt that found no evidence of Russian collusion, but destroyed the lives of innocent people who made the mistake of supporting the wrong candidate. General Michael Flynn was bankrupted and threatened with prosecution for his son unless he pleaded guilty to crimes he didn't commit. Paul Manafort was thrown in solitary confinement for crimes that had nothing to do with the election. This wasn't justice. This was revenge. When the Hunter Biden laptop story broke just weeks before the 2020 election, the FBI and intelligence community immediately claimed it was Russian disinformation. Social media companies censored the story, preventing Americans from learning about Joe Biden's corruption before they voted. This was election interference on a scale never seen in American history. The same agencies that spent 4 years claiming Russia interfered in our elections actively interfered in our elections. The January 6th investigation was another cover-up designed to criminalize political opposition. The committee refused to investigate the FBI's role in encouraging the riot, destroyed evidence, and denied due process to witnesses. They turned peaceful protesters into political prisoners, while real criminals walked free. The message was clear: challenge the regime, and you'll be destroyed. But perhaps the most shocking revelation is that these scandals aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that goes back decades. The American people have been systematically lied to, spied on, and betrayed by the very leaders they elected to protect them. The presidency has become a criminal enterprise where power is used to enrich cronies, silence opposition, and maintain control over an increasingly suspicious population. The deep state is real. It consists of unelected bureaucrats, intelligence operatives, and political insiders who remain in power regardless of which party controls the White House. They've been manipulating elections, fabricating evidence, and covering up crimes for generations. And they've been remarkably successful at keeping their secrets hidden from the American people. Until now. Because the truth is finally coming out. Whistleblowers are speaking up. Documents are being declassified, and ordinary Americans are demanding accountability from their government. The era of secret government and covered-up scandals is coming to an end. But the question remains, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue trusting the same institutions that have been lying to you for decades, or are you going to demand real transparency, real accountability, and real change? The choice is yours, but remember this. Every scandal I've described today was hidden from you for years or decades. How many more secrets are they still keeping? And what are they planning next? The presidency was supposed to serve the people. Instead, it has become a tool for those who seek to control the people. These aren't just political scandals. They're crimes against democracy itself. And until we hold these criminals accountable, they'll keep repeating the same patterns of abuse, corruption, and cover-up that have defined American politics for far too long. The most dangerous lie in American politics is that our leaders are fundamentally different from the dictators and tyrants we oppose around the world. The truth is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The presidency has become too powerful, too secretive, and too dangerous to trust with our freedom. It's time to strip away the secrecy, expose the corruption, and return power to where it belongs, with the American people. These presidential scandals aren't ancient history. They're warnings about what happens when we stop paying attention, stop asking questions, and stop holding our leaders accountable. The next scandal is being planned right now, in secret meetings, behind closed doors, by people who think they know better than you do. Don't let them get away with it. Demand the truth, demand transparency, and demand that your government finally starts serving you instead of lying to you.